Welcome. Welcome to Bristol Old Vic, where I am sitting as we prepare the stage for tonight's opening night of Touching the Void. And I'm delighted to be joined by Joe Simpson, who is, where are you, Joe?
I'm in the Peak District in Derbyshire.
Wonderful. My name's Tom Morris. I'm the artistic director here and director of this adaptation of Touching the Void. I think possibly you might have just seen a trailer of it without sound. If that's the case, we'll try and play it again with sound at the end. But we are having this conversation now because tonight we're reopening our theatre here. And we're reopening it not only for some of our audiences from Bristol and the region who come here regularly, but we're also doing something for the very first time, which is streaming live to a global audience. You can watch this from anywhere in the world. It's hopefully going to feel a bit like a party with some of the people in the room and some of the people watching a live broadcast, just as you would watch your favorite football team on telly if you couldn't be there. And Joe, I wanted to, now, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can enter any question you like into the chat and it will be passed to us so we can answer it. So please do throw your questions in from now if you've got questions to ask Joe. But I wanted to start with an open question really, Joe, because when we started working on the adaptation of your extraordinary book, David Gregg, who was the writer, he said, yeah. I said, one of the things I want to do is adapt this book, Touching the Void. And he said, if you're doing that, I'm going to write it. And I said, okay, great. And he said, yeah, I've got to write it. It's an epic. And climbers, I want you to tell us a little bit about what the word epic means to a climber, because he was talking as a writer, but also he knows a little bit about climbing. What is an epic in climber speak?
Oh, hard to say, really. I suppose it is. It's usually something that's gone wrong. It's usually something that has required some sort of extraordinary behavior to resolve what's gone wrong and to survive, or it might be just something that maybe you were supposed to take 2 or 3 days and ended up taking 6 days, and you only had food for 2 or 3 days, and you were strung out. It tends to be that sense of epic rather than the Greek drama sense of epic. Although there is quite a lot of death, like there is in Greek drama, so that works as well. But it tends to be something that is out of the ordinary and usually pretty terrifying, and usually the end is never sort of fully understood whether it's going to happen or not. There's a jeopardy involved, I guess.
I mean, it's interesting hearing you talking about it. There's another thing, isn't there, that climbers do, which is sort of understate things.
The Brits do. The Brits, particularly.
Is that the British climbers do that?
Yeah, the Americans don't. They overstate it. The Americans, the Australians are very like the Brits. They understate it. The Germans are very, very rational about it, and the Italians just go on and on and on.
Because there's a whole culture of climbers. I mean, I'm not a climber, but after I read Touching the Void, and I have to say it's a book that, for me, once you read it, it never leaves you. You stay with it. You actually live by it a bit. That's certainly what I feel. It becomes a kind of framework for your own struggles. We can come back to that in a minute. But there is, I guess, there's a sort of philosophical bent to some of your writing. Your book, This Game of Ghosts, which I absolutely recommend anyone to read, is a reflection really on what drives a climber to climb. And it was in some ways as big an inspiration on this piece of theatre as the book Touching the Void. I wonder if you could tell us a bit about that.
Well, yeah, the story's never left me, I can tell you. 36 years later, I'm still talking about it. But yeah, this Game of Ghosts, I actually thought was a more important book in a way. And it wasn't about why climbers climb, it was why I climbed. But I thought it would touch base with a lot of people who climbed. And people climb at different standards. They could be weekend climbers, or they could be hardcore extremist mountaineers, or whatever. So what it was trying to address was this simple fact that, in the first 25 years that I was climbing, 25 of my friends were killed. So, in my 20s and 30s, I was going to a lot of funerals there. Well, actually, there were memorials because people didn't come back. And this seemed extraordinary to me when I started to write about it, after having written Touching the Void, which I never intended to be an author. And I enjoyed writing Touching the Void in the end. And I thought, this is what I want to talk about. And I always found it extraordinary that, if you're losing a climbing partner once a year, I mean, if you're playing golf and you're losing a golfing partner once a year, you'd stop playing golf, wouldn't you? But we didn't. And so there seemed to be something more about it. Climbing has produced some great literature, but I think also it's about a different level, a more metaphysical level, maybe a more spiritual level. That you were prepared to push yourself to a point where a lot of people would just think it's ridiculous. And what did you get back? And how do you get it back? And what you got back was fairly intangible, actually. It wasn't like you were winning a gold medal or making lots of money or getting a prize or anything like that. You got a summit. That was it. And that's what this Game of Ghosts was essentially about. And this Game of Ghosts is a title from a Siegfried Sassoon poem. And it's about ghosts from the past. And I don't know whether I've answered your question, but
you have. I mean, I think it was Andy Gregg, the poet, who was talking to Mal Duff. And he wrote a book about Mal Duff. He's one of your friends and sort of inspirations. And he said that afterwards, he said that Mal Duff was someone who only started to relax at 12,000 feet or something. I can't remember quite what the altitude is. That somehow that Mal was someone who had this sort of restless energy. He almost couldn't live with the energy until he was up on a mountain.
Yeah, I put it a different way, really. I was exploring the notion that when you're climbing something and it's extreme and you're right on the edge, you are on the edge. You're walking that line between life and death, and if things go wrong, that's it. And it creates a sense, I think, of quite an extraordinary sort of almost a separation from life, and you live totally in the moment, and you don't concern yourself with whatever your tax bills or your job or any of the worries you normally have in your life. You're just in this place, and whether you got to the summit or not, when you get back down, that feeling dissipates. And I think that feeling is the one that you go back for. It's not about standing on summits and high altitude willy waving and all that sort of stuff. It's that sense of being somewhere just purely in the moment, and it's an extraordinary thing to do, to say, well, yeah, I have the confidence to think that I can do this, and I'm prepared to risk my life to do it. You don't feel like you're risking your life. You feel like you have the right to be there, and there's a psychology to it that is quite extraordinary, actually.
There's something else I've heard you talk about, which was lying on a tiny ledge when you're in a bivvy, looking up at the stars.
Yeah, I know.
And seeing a fossil.
Yeah. That was.
I wonder if you could share that.
Yeah, it was. It's quite weird, actually. I mean, my mother is Irish, or was Irish, and so I was brought up in this, horrendously Irish Roman Catholic upbringing in monastery schools and all that, and it was actually very religious when I was up till I was about 15. And when it all collapsed for me. I thought I had no religion and no spirituality or whatever. And actually, I found in the mountains a sort of spirituality, but not with any church or any religion or anything like more Buddhist, I suppose, in a way. But I think one of the things you found in the mountains is it just changed your perception of the world that you came back to. And the example you're talking about is I was at about 20,000 feet and I was bivouacking, comfy bivvy actually. And I remember putting my head down and looking at the rocks that I was lying on. There were fossils in the rock, and had this startling awareness that 10 million years ago, this mountain that I was on was the bottom of the Sea of Tethys or something like that. And then you turn over and you look at the stars, and stars in the mountains are just extraordinary. You know, at 20,000 feet, there's no light pollution. It's just diamonds on velvet. It's just amazing. And you're looking at light that's coming from stars that may have died 100,000 years ago. And that puts you into a perspective that you would never get, you know, playing golf, for example.
So I'm really intrigued. We've had a question from Paula Long, who's asking about why this experience started you off as a writer, because obviously, if your imagination, you always had a writer's imagination. What was it that made you convert this horrendous experience on Siula Grande into a writing career? Was there a moment where you suddenly did it, or did it happen to you?
Yeah, I mean, I had no intentions of being a writer. I just wanted to be a climber, you know, and I've done a degree. I've got a degree in literature and philosophy, but that's no qualification for writing, I'll tell you. But when I got back, this was pre-internet days, thank God, because today Simon would have been slaughtered, you know, by millions in a moment. And actually what happened was this story went round the climbing community like Chinese whispers, and went to 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 people come back to you, and you couldn't recognize any of this story at all, except the cutting of the rope. And everybody was very agitated by the cutting of the rope, because in truth, it's never happened before. Normally in an accident, you don't have time to start cutting a rope. So in a normal human condition, because we are humans and we always like to blame somebody else, they all blame Simon. As if somehow he had some Machiavellian malignant intent to kill me, you know, and they didn't actually know the facts of what's happened. So a friend of mine said, look, Joe, write a book. It was John Stevenson. And so I thought, okay, I'll give it a go. And I wrote Touch and Avoid in 7 weeks in his garret, his attic bedroom in Sheffield. And I thought, well, if this it's dedicated to Simon, thanking him for saving my life. And I thought if it sold to 500 climbers, great. But it's now, I don't know, well over 1 million copies, probably nearer 2 million in 27 languages. It's been made into a film, and now it's been made into a West End play, for God's sake. So my introduction to writing was accidental. You know, it was, and it's almost like Phoenix from the fire in a way. And I have a friend of mine who had a similar experience. He's a world-class mountaineer, unbelievable, Andy Parkin, unbelievable mountaineer. And he had a desperate accident in the Swiss Alps where a piton pulled when he was leading a client, and his client fell 5 feet and Andy fell 100 feet. And Andy broke his back, broke his hip in 11 places, broke his elbow, disrupted his heart so far from his membranes that a cardiologist who treated him had never seen someone survive it. Now, up until then, when Andy was on an expedition, he would just doodle around drawing and doing watercolors. And in this long rehab that he had, he got into his art. And he's now a world acclaimed sculptor and artist living in Chamonix. And he always had that skill. He always had that talent. He just never explored it because he was just totally focused on his climbing. And then maybe in an accidental sort of way, I could write, but I didn't know it until this thing happened that forced me to write. And it was only after I'd written Touch and Avoid, I thought, I didn't enjoy writing Touch and Avoid at all, but I was amazed at the experience of it. And then I wrote other books, and I've written 8 books now. So it's an unconventional way to start, but I don't know whether that answers the question.
Yeah, it does. But there's also something, I remember when we were when David Gregg, the writer, and I were planning the production, you very kindly agreed to meet us, and we just wanted to chat to you a little bit. And you took us to a pub, and you started telling us about your experience on Siula Grande. And some of what you said is in the show, like you showed the break like this.
Femur tibia.
Yeah, you physicalized it. And there is something, isn't there, about climbers telling stories in pubs? That is just a thing. It's like when you're not on a hill, and this is climber speak, isn't it? It can be the biggest mountain in the world, but you call it a hill. British climber speak.
It's a crag.
It's a crag. But when you're not in that extreme environment, you're in a pub in some way talking about it. Climbers do tell stories, don't they? What do you think that is or is it all climbers who tell stories? What's your sense of that culture?
Some climbers tell tall stories.
Yeah.
No, I mean, there's always been a tradition in climbing, that people used to come back from trips and they would get all the photographs we took. We always used slide film, so we'd always give slideshows, and you'd go and see Doug Scott or Joe Brown or Chris Bonington or all the climbers, and they would give these slideshows, and that was a tradition of that. But yeah, climbers always talk about their tall tales. It's part of passing information between each other. If somebody's gone to a remote area of Pakistan and you're in the pub together and you want to go to this area, you're going to talk to them and try and find out, how to get your expedition there. But you're constantly telling stories and about things that went wrong and things that went right. And it's actually just learning, because, in a similar way that when a friend got killed, the first question you'd ask was how. It wasn't.
So you needed to know how.
Yeah, it wasn't about the grief of losing them, which was there, but you needed to know what happened, because you might learn something, so that you don't do that. And the attrition was. If you read any of the books of Bonington or Scott or any of them of that generation, the attrition is just 20, 30, 40 people in their lifetime have been killed climbing. So this isn't a game. It isn't sort of done for ego and done for waving flags around and claiming summits for nations and all that. It's something much bigger than that. And so when you talk to other climbers, that they know what you're talking about. When you talk to you and David, I know you don't know what I'm talking about. Yeah. Does that make sense? You just don't know. And so if I'm trying to describe, it's the same problem as like trying to describe a broken leg. If people have never broken something, then you have to be quite graphic about it to try and give them an idea of how bloody painful this was. Otherwise,
but when you were in the pub, it was almost you were almost acting it out. It's almost because people don't understand. People really. My sister didn't understand. Sarah, who you put in the play, and by the way, she would have been absolutely over the moon to be front and center of the play, because that's how it was, and it was so sad that she couldn't see it. But I remember a couple of years after it, Sarah rang me up and she was in tears. And because she'd been playing tennis with a friend and she'd won, and she ran forward to jump over the net to celebrate in a very unsportsmanlike manner, and she caught her foot on the net, and she landed on her thumb, and she broke her thumb backwards and dislocated it. And she'd never broken anything before in her life, and she rang me up in tears because she said, "I've just realized how much pain you were in." And that perfectly illustrates it. If you've never broken anything, you can read, touch and avoid, and you still really won't understand quite how painful it was. And if you've never been at 20,000 feet or in -20, it's very hard to understand the physicality of it. I mean, I should say that, just people listening, that the reason that we put your sister Sarah in the play is actually because of the way that you write about her in this Game of Ghosts,
I get that.
when you were children together, and I have to say, anyone who hasn't read this Game of Ghosts, if you read the opening few chapters in which Joe's writing about his relationship with his sister, it's both profound and hilarious. I remember reading it out to my mum and dad saying, "You never believe this. Joe Simpson, the Touching the Void guy, is writing these extraordinarily funny stories." And it was just clear that it's very funny when you're creating a play which is based on, it's not you on stage, obviously, but it's based on someone who's real. You then get a sense, hang on, this relationship is really important.
It's interesting you say that, because when Ghost came out, there was quite a bit of criticism about all this family guff at the beginning. And, why isn't it all just about all the mountaineering, And those people, I think, missed the point, because what I was trying to say is I've got a family, I've got a sister, I've got these relationships. And when I die, that's what I lose. And the people who suffer are the people who are left behind, not the guys who die. I mean, that's always been Maria Coffey wrote a great book about this, about loss, which is that often partners of people who go off and die, they're the ones who suffer for the rest of their lives. They're the ones who grieve. And so the reason I told that story about Sarah was to try and give a sense that I'm a person, I'm not just a mountaineer, I'm a person who, when you die, this is what you're losing. You're losing far more than just an exciting mountaineering story.
Just muting myself because we're testing some of the sound effects. I don't know whether they're too loud. This is Love Will Tear Us Apart, if you can hear it. There's a very good question about from Graham Wiles, who's talking about applying the lessons from Touching the Void to people's lives. I want to ask you about that, because one of the bits that really stuck with me from the book is the bit where you're describing your journey down the mountain and you decide to focus just on the next rock that you can see. Forget about everything else. Just look at the next rock. Just 30 minutes to the next rock. Forget anything else exists, then 30 minutes to the next rock. Now, for me, that's become a life lesson, that description. And in other words, it's a technique of survival to not see the big picture and focus on the small picture. Is that something you knew already, or is that something you discovered by instinct?
I think a lot of it was instinct. But I actually think that when you're thrown into a situation like that, there's, like, keep calm is probably a really good bit of advice. Having a hissy fit is really not going to help you. And being emotional is not going to help you. You have to be, I think, very pragmatic about analyzing the situation you're in and what you're going to do about it. This bit you're talking about the next 20 minutes or 30 minutes, this came about when I eventually got out the crevasse. And I've got to say, being in the crevasse was just, I still don't even go there ever. It was appalling. But when I got out of the crevasse, and I saw Simon's tracks leading away, and I knew that meant he had left and he wasn't coming back. So he thought I was dead. And that was a pretty chilling moment, actually, because, you don't come and look for a corpse. So I pretty much knew I was screwed, actually, at that point. But anyway, I got down to the glacier and I started crawling along this thing. And my hands were quite frostbitten. And at the time, I kept stopping to try to warm them up. And I remember looking at my watch, and I had this really cheap, crappy watch, and I thought 5 minutes had gone by, and actually about 45 minutes had gone by. I was thinking, whoa, well, what the hell's going on here? And I've since put it down to I don't think we're ever truly alone in modern life. I mean, truly alone, there's nothing coming in. There's no data, there's no radio, there's no TV, there's no conversations, there's no books, there's nothing coming in. So it's quite nice, except that I think it's like a sensory deprivation, and it starts to mess with your temporal and spatial awareness. And I realized then that if I didn't get a handle on this, I'd just run out of time. So I'd look at this watch and I'd go, right, I've got to get to that crevasse in 20 minutes. And I'd crawl off and get to that crevasse. And it was like a little competition. And if I got there in 19 minutes, I was made up. And if I got there in 21 minutes, I was absolutely livid. And this watch saved my life because it did two things. One, it gave me structure. it gave me targets, little competitive targets that I could achieve. And by the end, 3.5 days later, I was cheating like crazy. But nevertheless, I was quite disciplined in what I was doing. But also, it stopped making me look at the big picture, which was this huge distance I had to cover with no food and no water and badly injured. And if I looked at that picture, your brain would just give up. You'd just stop. Whereas 20 minutes, I could deal with 20 minutes. So it was a sort of instinctive, pragmatic thing, but I can see now in a way how it helps with problem solving. Often you're faced with a huge problem and you think you don't know where to start. Well, as the Japanese say, it all starts with one footstep. Just start at the beginning and don't think about the end. Just do this and then do it again and then do it again. And it sort of kept me sane, you know. And that watch broke down 2 weeks later. Not working.
And so, you know, it's one of those things, isn't it? If it hadn't been working, that
I think I would have died. I think I would have died because I wouldn't have known what 20 minutes was. I'm pretty certain I would have died. It was a funny little thing that I did. And yeah, I'm absolutely certain without that watch, I would have died because I couldn't. What I could do is I could compartmentalize my reality into manageable bites of pain. And then I'd get to my place and I go, I've done it. Great. Do it again. Do it again. 3.5 days.
So for me, and this is to do with Graham Wiles's question, really, I don't have to have been on a mountain or shattered my knee for that to be a really interesting and useful practical lesson for me in whatever. There's another question here from Joe Hilton. Do you think the last 12 months have given us all a better perspective on the challenges we can overcome? I guess, you know, maybe this is a question for people watching, are there ways in which those sort of techniques might be useful for all of us who are facing, you know, much less acute challenges, but nonetheless serious challenges through this?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think Joe Hilton probably on the spot there, in the sense that there's the thing in the paper today about how a lot of young people are saying that this last year has made them stronger and made them more resilient, that it's made them react, it's made them think and do things out of their comfort zone, because we've all been out of our comfort zone, you know. And I think that in times past, there's always been pandemics, you know, there's always been natural disasters, there's been world wars, you know, and it's arguable that all of these things actually, they cause great change, which is, I think change is good. Doesn't matter whether it's bad change or good change, it's good because it refocuses everything. But I think it makes people resilient. It makes people understand that, you know, Jesus, you know, that was a bad year, but I got through it. And that's an important lesson, however mild a lesson it is. So we got through this thing. And then, but you know what? It could happen again next year or in 10 years' time. And you know what? We'll get through it. And I think, you know, I'm not going back to the Blitz years and whatever, but I think that that is inherent in our nature, in the human nature, in societies. We've done it repeatedly and repeatedly over centuries and centuries of warfare and famines and plagues and whatever. So it's not all bad. Let's put it that way, you know. And I think also it's forced change in just like what we're doing tonight. This would have never happened a year ago. But this might change the way some people can see theatre who can't get to London and they can't get to Bristol. It changes how people interact with their doctors, with their loved ones, you know, and that's the plus. The minus is all the deaths and all the tragedy, but it's not all grim. There's always good on the backside of bad. That's intriguing.
There's another bit which you just hinted at before, the experience in the crevasse. But I think for many people who've read the book, and you've spoken about it very, very eloquently, there's a point where there's absolutely no way you can climb out of the crevasse. And you've tried everything and you've realized that. And you can't go sideways either. And you decide to go down. into the bottom of the crevasse, which is the most terrifying decision to make. And I've seen an interview of you speaking about it where you say, I realized that even when the only decisions you could make are stupid decisions, you've got to keep making decisions.
Yeah,
otherwise,
yeah.
Is it
the truth? Yeah, the truth of that is that my options were quite limited, to be honest. And I could have sat there and felt really sorry for myself and thought I could have kidded myself that somebody was going to come and find me and rescue me. But as a mountaineer, I knew they weren't. I knew nobody was coming to rescue me. So then that sitting there choice wasn't sitting there, it was waiting to die. And you don't die of a broken leg, you die slowly of hypothermia and dehydration. I'd eat a lot of snow and I had a warm sleeping bag, so it'd take, what, 5 days? And by the time you died, you'd just be out of your mind. You'd be completely out of your mind in this twilight world. The only thing I hadn't explored was going deeper, which is counterintuitive. You know, you're buried alive, you don't dig yourself deeper. But the fact is I hadn't explored it and there was nothing else I could do. So I had to do that. And in another way, it was a sort of suicide, because if there was nothing down there when I got to the end of the rope, I had frostbitten hands, I wouldn't have been able to control the rope. It would have gone through my friction device and I would have died. I would have fallen off and died in the crevasse because I didn't have the courage to kill myself. And it takes courage to kill yourself. But what it did is it opened up, because I took that chance, and I'm not saying it was an easy decision. I found deeper down that there was a way out, a very difficult way out, but I got out. But if I hadn't made that decision, I was dead in the water and I would have died, not knowing that 65 feet below me, there was a way out, because I was too scared to explore it. And because I wanted to tell myself some story that someone was going to come and help me. And they weren't going to come and help me. I knew. So
for me, this does kind of come back to the word epic in a way, because it's almost as if climbers, it's not the only category of people, but it's one of the categories of people who live life at such extremity that the kind of acute angles of decision making and exposure to risk or endurance are so much sharper that it's almost as if an emotional landscape is being plotted, which then the rest of us can apply to our humdrum lives. Because the same thing, I've never been in any situation like that, but I have been in situations in which I felt absolutely stuck. And I've thought, hang on, that thing about making decisions, even if they appear to be stupid or the wrong decision, at least you're giving yourself another premise to move on from.
Well,
that's a life lesson.
Yeah, but that point being that you're still moving forward. You might be moving forward now in the wrong direction, which gives you a chance to change your direction. But if you just stop still, you haven't given it a chance to do anything. You're screwed. But having said that, look, climbing is not about epics. These don't happen very often, thank God. And so, most of the time we go and do climbs, we have a fantastic time. We love the ice climbing, we love the rock climbing, and we have a fantastic time. Every now and then it just completely goes to rat shit. And that's it. Then you have to start making decisions about things. But I think that you have to be quite pragmatic. I think most climbers are quite pragmatic. They don't, they don't get wildly emotional about stuff when they're on the hill. They don't, because you can't operate. But don't get the impression, if you give the general public the impression that we're all doing what I did. That's not true. This doesn't happen very often. And I'll tell you one thing, 99% of the time, if you fall down a crevasse without a rope, you're dead. So don't try it.
Oh, that's good advice to everyone. Now, there's a question from John Martin, which we have to ask you, just in case it's the singer who wrote the song who says, what do you think you'd be doing now if you hadn't had that accident or that experience?
Oh, good Lord, how long's a piece of string? I mean, I've always been driven by that, in the sense that I can remember somebody years and years ago saying, God, given the success of Touching the Void, you know, you're probably quite pleased that happened, weren't you? I was like looking at him thinking, what? And I was just thinking, what you mean? You mean if I could get this opportunity again, that I would go through that for 5.5 days, you know? And anyway, but actually it's a bittersweet thing, because it was the first trip I went on, and I wanted to climb the world. I wanted to go and do more routes like Siula Grande and go and do routes in the Himalayas, and I wanted to do it in that style, alpine style and whatever. And it pretty much kicked it out of me. I did climb a lot after that, but never with that commitment, and something changed. And so that was sad, that I always wonder what I could have achieved. And on the other side, as a climber, yeah, which was more important, really, much more important than fame or success or wealth or any of that stuff. And so there's always that sort of slight regret. Well, no, it's a major regret actually. But and then again, I think, well, yeah, well, I'd have carried on down that road doing harder and harder things, and in all likelihood, I'd probably be dead, given the amount of mates that are dead. So I don't know. But actually, the other side of it is that there's a blessing in that I discovered I could write, and I find writing as well more frightening and challenging than climbing, you know. And I find it makes you feel very vulnerable and very
it can't actually be more frightening than climbing.
God,
really?
Yeah, it exposes you in a way. You're saying, you know, when I go and climb something, I don't climb it for you. I don't climb it to be viewed by somebody. I don't climb it to be read by somebody. I just go and do a climb, and that's my experience. You write a book and you know someone's going to read it, you make yourself vulnerable straight away. They might go, "God, that's absolute crap," that, or, you know, whatever. You're actually asking for people's approval. That's a totally more scary thing. And also just the process of writing. I mean, when I write, I spend most of my time writing thinking, this is rubbish. Who wants to read this? So the process is quite different. But I enjoy it, and I would never have discovered that if that accident hadn't happened. So I'm not really answering the question very well, but I don't know what I would have done. I would have just tried to keep climbing in some way or other, just like my friends do.
But you're also brilliantly segueing to another question, which is someone who hasn't given their name has said, after experiencing so much intensity in your life as a climber, is life after climbing impossibly vanilla? And what do you now do to replace that excitement? And does writing have the same intensity in any way?
No.
Well,
yeah, well, it's different. I stopped climbing. I went to the Himalayas with a friend of mine about 11 years ago to go and do a new route on this mountain. And my friend couldn't do it in the end. So he was there, but I climbed it alone and did this first descent. And I sat on the top and I was looking at all these amazing mountains, Lhotse and Everest and whatever. And I was just thinking, I've got 3 days going downhill now and it's going to kill me because of my injuries, you know. And when I got to Kathmandu, I sold all my gear, and I've never climbed since. And for 5 years, it was like a grief. I couldn't understand how dislocated I felt that I wasn't climbing anymore. And then I thought about it. I did a lot of quite serious paragliding. I used to paraglide in Brazil and Australia and Britain and whatever, cross-country paragliding. And then I decided, look, both my legs are broken. I really don't need to do this and break my legs again. And it wasn't, I realized I was trying to replace something with something else, and you can't. So I just left it be. And no, my life's not vanilla. I miss climbing just hugely, but what I miss is not the actual climbing. I miss the getting on a plane with some mates and going off on an adventure that you have no idea what's going to happen, and it's just going to be great. I miss that. And I do a lot of fly fishing, and it's really not quite the same, you know. I've got to admit that.
Well, I think we've overrun because your answers are so interesting, Joe, but, not at all. But I want to thank you very much for your openness in this conversation, for your extraordinary story, and also for being so generous, really, with the fact that you're stuck with this story. You know, it sort of keeps coming back to you because it is so powerful, so resonant, and so many people want to try and understand themselves and the world through it. It really is a gift.
Maybe we should do the musical next.
I'm not sure about a musical, but maybe someone watching will do that. But what we are going to do, we've now fixed the sound on the trailer. Right. So wherever you are in your sitting rooms, please give Joe a very warm round of applause. We have to go now and get ready for the live broadcast, which starts this evening at 8 o'clock. And if you look at the Bristol Vic website, you can still get a ticket, because weirdly, that's what you can do. We're going to get ready for the show. But once again, thank you very much, Joe. It's a big sound effect going. I'm going to hand over to Jack. We're going to disappear, and we'll play you the trailer once again.
The trick with the void is not to fear it, but to accept it. Use it like a drug, to sharpen your senses, heighten your awareness. When people ask, why climb? The question assumes that it's being there, clambering over rocks that's weird. But it isn't climbing that's weird. It's not climbing. Joe's gone. You need to let him go.
What? Like you did?
Joe! Joe!